He may be the most powerful man in the city, but right now, he can't even open his eyes. The fluorescent lights hum softly above as Sophie Bennett leans closer, her voice barely more than a whisper, the kind meant for someone who might still be listening somewhere deep inside. The man in front of her lies motionless in a private hospital suite that looks more like a luxury penthouse than a place for healing, every surface polished, every machine silent except for the steady, reassuring beep of a heart monitor. And yet nothing about this room feels alive, not even him, Alexander Reed, billionaire, CEO, the man whose name alone can shift markets by morning, is reduced to stillness, his tailored suit replaced by a simple hospital gown, his sharp presence now just a memory lingering in the air like a shadow that refuses to leave. Sophie studies him for a moment longer, not the headlines, not the reputation, just the man, the pale stillness of his hands, the faint crease between his brows as if even unconscious, he's still carrying the weight of a world that never stopped. Demanding from him, she exhales slowly, setting down the clipboard at the edge of the bed, her movements gentle but unafraid, because unlike everyone else who tiptoes around power, Sophie has never been impressed by it, not when people still forget to eat, still forget to rest, still forget how to feel. You haven't eaten, she murmurs, as if it matters, as if he could answer, then pauses, tilting her head slightly, a small frown forming. I guess that's not really the point, is it? The city outside stretches endlessly through the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York glowing in gold and glass, 12 stories below, taxis moving like veins of light, people rushing, deals closing, lives changing, all of it still orbiting around a man who isn't even conscious to see it. Just hours ago, Alexander Reed had been standing in a boardroom larger than most apartments, issuing commands in a voice so calm it left no room for disagreement, men twice his age nodding without question. Because power like his doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to exist, and yet somewhere between one decision and the next, something inside him gave way, not dramatically, not violently, just a quiet collapse, the kind no one notices until it's too late. Sophie reaches for a glass of water, dipping a cloth into it, wringing it out with practiced ease before gently pressing it against his hand, her touch careful, grounded, real. You know, she says softly, almost to herself, people think power means you don't need anyone, but I've never seen someone who needed people more than the ones who pretend they don't. The cloth moves slowly across his skin, warm against the cold stillness, and for a moment, nothing changes. The machines continue their steady rhythm, the room remains perfectly controlled, perfectly quiet, perfectly empty, but then, just barely, his fingers twitch, so slight it could be nothing, a reflex, a trick of the eye, but Sophie notices, her breath catching for half a second before she steadies herself, leaning in just a little closer, not startled, not afraid, just present. There you are, she whispers, a small, almost invisible smile touching her lips, not because he's awake, not yet, but because for the first time in what might be a very long time, Alexander Reed didn't look like the most powerful man in the world, he looked like someone who could be reached. The next morning arrives without announcement, only the quiet shift of light across the glass walls as the city wakes up again without him, and for the first time in years, Alexander Reed is not the one controlling the pace of it. Sophie steps into the room just after 7, a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a small brown bag in the other, her sneakers making almost no sound against the polished floor. And she pauses for a second at the door, studying him the same way she had the night before, not as a headline, not as a name that fills rooms, just a man lying still in a space that feels too big for a single person. Good morning, she says softly, setting her things down on the side table as if routine alone could anchor something real in this place. I brought breakfast, even though you are not exactly asking for it, she adds with a faint, almost amused breath, pulling up a chair beside the bed. The monitor continues its steady rhythm, calm and indifferent, but Sophie does not rush, she never does, because she has learned that healing is not something you force, it is something you stay for. She unwraps the sandwich slowly, the quiet crinkle of paper filling the silence for a moment, then glances at him again, tilting her head slightly. You know, most people would be terrified to sit in a room with you, she says, not accusing, not impressed, just stating a truth that has shaped too many lives around him. But right now, you are just a guy who forgot how to take care of himself, and there is no judgment in her voice, only something steadier, something grounded. Outside, a helicopter passes in the distance, the city already moving at full speed, meetings beginning, numbers shifting, decisions being made in rooms where his absence has already become a problem someone else is trying to solve, but inside this room, time feels slower, almost stubbornly so, as if refusing to keep up. With a world that demands constant motion, Sophie reaches for the clipboard, scanning the notes quickly before setting it aside again, uninterested in reducing him to numbers and charts, and instead she leans forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees, her voice quieter now, more personal. "Do you remember the last time you sat still without checking your phone?" she asks, knowing there will be no answer, but asking anyway, because sometimes questions matter even when they are not answered. Her gaze lingers on his face, the sharp lines softened now by stillness, the tension that must have lived there hidden beneath layers of control, and she exhales slowly, shaking her head just a little. "I see this a lot," she continues, almost like she is letting him in on a secret. "People who think they are strong because they never stop, but really, they just never learned how to rest," and for a moment, her voice carries something deeper, something personal, but she lets it pass. Before it settles too long, she reaches for the cloth again, repeating the same gentle motion from the night before, warm water, steady hands, the kind of care that does not ask permission but does not take more than it should, and as she moves, there is a quiet consistency to it, something that does not depend on whether he responds or not. "So here is the deal," she says after a moment, a small hint of determination slipping into her tone. "I am going to show up, every day, whether you notice or not, whether you like it or not, because that is what people do for each other, at least, it is what they are supposed to do." And the words hang there gently, not heavy, not forced, just present, like everything else she brings into this room. For a long second, nothing changes, the same steady rhythm, the same quiet air, the same stillness that has defined him since he arrived here, but then, again, there is the slightest shift, a faint tightening in his fingers, almost like a response that has not yet found its voice, and Sophie notices, of course she does, her eyes narrowing just a fraction, not in surprise, but in quiet recognition, like she has been waiting for this moment even if she did not know it, and she leans back slightly, crossing her arms with a soft exhale. "All right," she murmurs, a hint of a smile returning, "maybe you are still in there after all." By the third day, the room begins to feel different, not because anything obvious has changed, but because something subtle has shifted in the space between silence and presence, and Sophie notices at the moment she walks in, the way people who pay attention always do. She pauses just inside the door, her eyes moving instinctively to Alexander before anything else, as if checking whether the version of him from yesterday is still there. And for a brief second, she wonders if she imagined it all. The slight movement, the almost response, the feeling that he is closer to the surface than anyone realizes. "Do not make me look crazy today," she says under her breath, setting her bag down with a quiet thud before stepping closer, her tone light but her focus sharp, because this is the part no one talks about, the waiting, the uncertainty, the small moments that could mean everything or nothing at all. The city outside continues its relentless rhythm, horns in the distance, sunlight reflecting off glass towers, the world moving as if Alexander Reed has not paused inside it, as if power is something that can simply replace itself when necessary. But here, in this room, time still bends around him, slow and deliberate. Sophie pulls the chair closer again, the legs scraping softly against the floor, and sits, resting her forearms on her knees, leaning forward just enough to close the distance without forcing it. "Okay," she begins, her voice calm, conversational, like she is speaking to someone fully awake. "Here is what I know about you," she continues, tilting her head slightly. "You built an empire before most people figured out what they wanted to do with their lives. You make decisions that affect thousands of people without blinking, and somehow, you still forgot how to take care of yourself." There is no edge in her tone, only quiet observation, the kind that lands deeper because it is not trying to impress. She studies his face again, searching for any sign, any reaction, but his expression remains still, almost too still, like a mask that has been worn for too long even in rest. "You know what I think," she adds after a moment, her voice dropping just a little. "I think you got so good at being in control, you forgot how to let anything reach you," and the words linger in the air, soft but undeniable. She reaches for the small brown bag again, pulling out a fresh cup of tea this time, steam curling upward and thin, delicate lines, and sets it on the table beside him, even though she knows he will not drink it, because routine is not about immediate results, it is about consistency, about showing up in the same way until something inside decides to respond. This is your new routine, she says quietly, almost like she is making a promise instead of a plan. Tea in the morning, quiet conversation, and someone who is not afraid of you, and for a second, her lips curve into the faintest smile, not playful, not teasing, just real. She dips the cloth into warm water again, repeating the same careful motion, her hands steady, grounded, present, and as she brushes it lightly across his wrist, there it is again, not imagined this time, not subtle enough to dismiss, a slight tightening, a delayed response, but real, unmistakably real. Sophie freezes for half a heartbeat, her eyes locking onto his hand, her breath catching just enough to register the moment without breaking it, and then she exhales slowly, a quiet recognition settling in her chest. She leans back slightly, studying him with a new kind of focus now, not just watching, but waiting. There it is, she whispers, softer than before, almost reverent, "You heard me, did you not?" And for the first time since he arrived, the silence in the room does not feel empty, it feels like something is trying to answer. On the fourth day, the air in the room feels heavier, not with tension, but with something quieter, something expectant, like the space itself is holding its breath, and Sophie senses it the moment she steps inside, her eyes going straight to Alexander before anything else, searching without realizing she is searching. The morning light spills across the floor in long golden lines, brushing against the edge of the bed, touching his still form as if the world outside is trying, in its own distant way, to reach him too. "All right," she says softly as she sets her things down, her voice steady but carrying a note of curiosity now, "let us see if you are still listening today," and there is no hesitation in her movement as she walks closer, pulling the chair into its familiar place beside him, because routine has already begun to build something here, something neither of them fully understands yet. She studies his face for a moment longer than usual, noticing the smallest details. The slight shift in his breathing, the faint tension that was not there before, and she leans forward just enough, her voice lowering instinctively. "You are not as far away as they think you are," she murmurs, almost like she is letting him in on a secret no one else has noticed. Outside, the city hums with its usual urgency, people chasing deadlines, numbers, success. But inside this room, something slower is unfolding. Something that does not respond to pressure or power, something that only responds to presence. Sophie reaches for the cloth again, dipping it into warm water, the quiet ritual grounding her as much as it is meant to ground him, and as she gently brushes it across his hand, she watches closely this time, not hoping, not expecting, just observing, and there it is again, clearer now, more deliberate, a slight movement of his fingers, a faint resistance against stillness, and this time she does not freeze, she does not question it, she simply acknowledges it with a soft exhale, like she has been waiting for this confirmation. "There you are," she says quietly, a small smile forming, not triumphant, not surprised, just certain. "I knew you were still in there," and her voice carries a warmth that fills the room in a way no machine ever could. She sets the cloth aside and leans back slightly, studying him with a different kind of attention now, one that recognizes presence instead of absence. "You do not have to come back all at once," she continues, her tone calm, reassuring, "just stay where you are, and keep listening," and the words are simple, but they land with a quiet weight, like an invitation instead of a command. For a moment, everything settles again, the steady rhythm of the monitor, the distant noise of the city, the soft hum of the lights, but the silence is no longer empty, it feels active now, like something is happening just beneath the surface. Sophie reaches for the cup of tea she brought, placing it carefully on the table beside him, the steam rising in thin curls. "This is still part of your routine," she adds lightly, almost teasing, "even if you are not ready to argue with me about it yet," and she lets out a small breath that could almost be a laugh, the kind that does not need a response to exist. She shifts in her chair, resting her chin lightly against her hand as she watches him, not impatient, not distracted, just present in a way most people never are, and after a few quiet seconds, she speaks again, softer this time, more personal. "You know, power does not mean much in here," she says, her eyes steady on him. "In here, it is just you, and whether you decide to come back," and the words linger, not heavy, not forced, just honest, and then, almost as if answering her, his fingers move again, slightly stronger. This time, not enough to wake him, not enough to break the stillness completely, but enough to prove that something inside him is pushing forward, something that has not given up yet, and Sophie notices, of course she does, her gaze sharpening just a fraction before softening again, and she leans back with a quiet nod, as if acknowledging a silent agreement between them. Good, she whispers, barely audible, that is more than enough for today. By the 5th day, the room no longer feels like a place where something ended, it feels like a place where something is slowly beginning, and Sophie notices it not in the machines or the charts, but in the quiet changes that most people would overlook, the kind that only appear when someone chooses to stay long enough to see them. She walks in just before sunrise this time, earlier than usual. The sky outside still painted in soft shades of blue and gray, the city not fully awake yet, and for a moment, she pauses again at the door, her eyes settling on Alexander with a kind of familiarity that did not exist a few days ago. You picked a good time to start coming back, she says softly, setting her bag down with a quiet motion. The world is a little less loud right now, and her voice carries a calm that matches the stillness of the morning. She steps closer, pulling the chair into place without looking, her body already memorizing the rhythm of this room, and as she sits, she studies him again, not searching for dramatic change, just observing the details, the subtle shifts in his breathing, the faint tension that now feels less like resistance and more like effort. You know what I realized, she continues after a moment, her tone thoughtful, almost reflective. People think healing is something big, like waking up all at once, making some grand comeback. She tilts her head slightly, her gaze steady on him. But most of the time, it is just this, small things, happening quietly, over and over again, and the words seem to settle into the space between them, soft but steady. She reaches for the cup of tea she brought, placing it carefully on the table beside him, the steam rising slowly as if marking the passage of time. Day 5, she adds lightly, almost like she is keeping track for both of them. You have been ignoring my tea for 5 days straight. That is a record, and there is a faint hint of humor in her voice now, something warmer, more personal, like she is no longer just doing her job, but sharing a moment. Her hand moves gently to his wrist again, repeating the now familiar routine, the warm cloth brushing lightly across his skin. And this time, she does not wait for confirmation, she expects it, not out of certainty, but out of trust in the pattern they have created, and right on time, his fingers respond, a little stronger, a little more certain, the movement no longer hesitant but intentional. Sophie exhales slowly, not surprised, but quietly relieved, her eyes softening as she watches the small shift unfold. That is it, she whispers, leaning in just slightly, her voice calm but filled with quiet encouragement. You do not have to rush, just keep going. And for a second, it feels like he might be closer than ever, like the distance between silence and awareness is narrowing in ways no one else can see. She leans back again, crossing her arms loosely as she studies him, her expression thoughtful now, almost as if she is trying to understand not just what is happening, but who he is beneath everything she has heard about him. I wonder what it is like, being you, she says after a pause, her voice softer, more personal than before, having everything, and still ending up here. And there is no judgment in her words, only curiosity, the kind that comes from someone who has seen enough of the world to know that power does not protect people from themselves. Outside, the first rays of sunlight begin to break through the skyline, casting a warm glow into the room, touching the edges of the bed, the chair, the quiet space they have built together, and for the first time, the light does not feel distant, it feels like it belongs here. Sophie watches him for a moment longer, then nods faintly, as if acknowledging something unspoken between them. You are doing better than you think, she murmurs, almost to him, almost to herself, and as the silence settles again, it no longer feels like emptiness, it feels like progress. On the 6th day, something changes before Sophie even says a word, not in the room, not in the light, but in him, and she feels at the moment she steps inside, like walking into a space where silence is no longer empty but waiting. She closes the door gently behind her, her eyes already fixed on Alexander, searching without thinking, and this time, she does not have to look long. There is a faint tension in his jaw, a subtle shift in his breathing, and for the first time, it feels less like he Is drifting somewhere far away and more like he is standing at the edge of returning. You are getting closer, she says quietly, setting her bag down with a soft motion, her voice calm but carrying a quiet certainty now. I can feel it, and she does not question that feeling, not anymore. She walks over, pulling the chair into place, but instead of sitting immediately, she pauses beside him, studying his face with a kind of focus that is no longer clinical, no longer distant, it is personal. Now, grounded in days of showing up when no one else stayed this long, you know, she continues, her tone thoughtful, most people out there think you are unstoppable. She gestures faintly toward the city beyond the glass, like nothing could ever touch you, then her gaze returns to him, softer now, steadier, but here, you are just human. And there is something in the way she says it that makes it sound less like a limitation and more like a truth he has been avoiding his entire life. She finally sits, leaning forward slightly, her elbows resting on her knees, her presence close but never overwhelming, and being human means you get to come back, she adds, almost like she is offering him permission he never gave himself. The room holds that quiet for a moment, the steady rhythm of the monitor filling the space between her words, and then she reaches for his hand, not with hesitation, not with caution, but with familiarity, the kind that has been built through repetition. Through patience, through care that does not demand anything in return, her fingers rest lightly against his, warm and steady, and for a second. Nothing happens, the same stillness, the same quiet, but she does not pull away, she does not rush, she simply stays. Come on, she murmurs softly, her voice lower now, more intimate, you have been listening for days, you can do more than that, and there is no pressure in her tone, only encouragement, the kind that invites rather than forces, and then it happens, not dramatic, not sudden, but undeniable, his fingers move again, stronger this time, more deliberate, curling ever so slightly against her hand as if trying to respond, as if trying to reach back, and Sophie feels it instantly, her breath catching for a fraction of a second before she steadies herself, her grip remaining gentle but firm, grounding him in the moment. There you are, she whispers, her voice barely audible now, but filled with something deeper than before, something that feels like relief, like recognition, like the beginning of something real. She leans back slightly, her eyes never leaving him. Watching for more, waiting without pushing, and for a brief second, there is another shift, a faint tightening around his eyes, almost imperceptible, but enough to suggest that whatever distance once held him is starting to break. Sophie exhales slowly, her expression softening as she studies him, not as a patient, not as a powerful man, but as someone who is finally allowing himself to be reached. You do not have to carry everything alone anymore, she says gently, her voice steady, grounded. Not in here, and the words settle into the room like something permanent, something that does not fade when the moment passes. Outside, the city continues to move, unaware, unchanged, but inside, something shifts quietly, something that no boardroom, no decision, no amount of power could ever create, the simple, undeniable truth that Alexander Reed is no longer completely alone, not anymore. By the seventh day, the distance between silence and awareness feels thinner than ever, like a fragile line that could break at any moment, and Sophie senses it before she even touches him, the way the air in the room feels charged with something unspoken, something waiting to surface. She steps in quietly, closing the door behind her with the same gentle care she has shown every day, but this time, her movements are slower, more deliberate, as if she already knows that today is different. Her eyes find Alexander immediately, and for a brief moment, she just stands there, watching him, not as a patient, not as a powerful figure, but as someone standing at the edge of waking up to himself. Okay, she murmurs softly, setting her bag down, her voice steady but carrying a quiet anticipation, I think. You are ready to stop hiding now, and the words linger in the air, not demanding, not forceful, just present, like everything else she has given him. She moves closer, pulling the chair into place, but instead of sitting right away, she leans slightly over the bed, studying the subtle tension in his face, the faint shift in his breathing that now feels almost intentional. You have been listening long enough, she continues, her tone gentle but firm. It is time to come back, and there is something different in her voice now, not just encouragement, but belief, the kind that does not waver even when there is no guarantee. She reaches for his hand again, her fingers wrapping lightly around his, the contact warm and steady, grounding, and for a moment, everything holds still, the quiet hum of the machines, the distant city noise, the soft rhythm of his heartbeat filling the space between them. Alexander, she says softly, using his name for the first time in this way, not as a label, not as a title, but as a person. If you can hear me, you do not have to do this alone, and the words settle deeper than anything she has said before, carrying a weight that feels personal now, real, and then, without warning, there is a stronger response, his fingers tightening around hers, not just a reflex, not just a flicker, but a clear, deliberate movement. As if something inside him has finally pushed through the distance, Sophie freezes for a fraction of a second, her breath catching as her eyes lock onto his hand. Then she leans in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper filled with quiet urgency. That is it, stay with me, and for the first time, it feels like he is not just listening, but trying. A faint crease forms between his brows, his expression shifting ever so slightly, like he is reaching through something heavy, something that has held him back for far too long, and Sophie stays right there, her hand steady, her presence unwavering, not pulling away, not rushing him, just holding the moment together. You are safe here, she murmurs, her voice calm but firm. You can let go of everything else. And the words seem to guide something inside him, something that has been locked away behind years of control and silence. Outside, the city continues without pause, unaware that in this quiet room, something far more important is unfolding, something no one can measure or predict. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, his eyelids begin to shift, not fully opening, not yet, but enough to break the stillness. Enough to show that the barrier between where he was and where he is now is starting to crack. Sophie exhales softly, her expression softening. With a quiet relief she does not try to hide, her grip on his hand remaining steady, grounding him in the present. There you are, she whispers again, softer this time, almost like she is speaking to something fragile, something new. I knew you would find your way back, and for the first time since this began, the silence does not feel like waiting, it feels like the beginning of his return. The moment finally comes quietly, without announcement, without drama, just a slow unfolding that feels almost fragile, as if the world itself is careful not to rush it, and Sophie is right there when it happens, her hand still wrapped gently around Alexander's, her presence steady in a way that has become the only constant in his return. His eyelids shift again, this time more deliberately. The faint tremor no longer uncertain but driven by something stronger beneath the surface, and for a brief second, the room seems to hold its breath, the steady rhythm of the monitor echoing louder in the silence. Stay with me, Sophie whispers softly, leaning closer, her voice calm but filled with quiet encouragement, not pushing, not demanding, just guiding. And then slowly, almost reluctantly, his eyes begin to open. At first, it is only a narrow slit, a flicker of awareness struggling against the brightness of the room, but it is enough to break the barrier that has held him for days, enough to change everything. His gaze is unfocused at first, drifting, searching without understanding, and Sophie does not move away. She stays exactly where she is, her hand still grounding him, her presence the only familiar thing in a world that must feel distant and unfamiliar. You are okay, she says gently, her voice steady, reassuring. You are safe. And the words settle into the moment, simple but anchoring, something he can hold on to even as everything else feels unclear. His breathing shifts slightly, deeper now, more aware, and there is a faint crease in his brow as if he is trying to piece together where he is, what happened, why everything feels so heavy and yet so empty at the same time. His eyes move again, slower this time, more focused, and eventually, they land on her. Really seeing her for the first time, and there is something in that moment, something unspoken, a quiet recognition not of who she is, but of what she represents, someone who stayed when he could not respond, someone who saw him when he had nothing to offer. Sophie meets his gaze without hesitation, her expression calm, warm, but grounded, not overwhelmed, not distant, just present. Exactly as she has been from the beginning. Welcome back, she says softly, a small, genuine smile forming, not exaggerated, not performative, just real. And for a second, he simply looks at her, as if trying to understand how someone could speak to him like that, without fear, without expectation, without seeing the power he once carried. His lips part slightly, as if he wants to say something, but no words come, only a quiet breath, and Sophie does not rush him, she does not fill the silence, she lets it exist. Because she understands that this moment is not about answers, it is about awareness. Outside, the city continues its endless motion, unaware that in this room, something far more important has just happened, something no deal or decision could ever replicate. Alexander Reed, the man who controlled everything, is now simply a man who has just woken up, disoriented, vulnerable, and for the first time in a long time, truly present. Sophie slowly loosens her grip on his hand but does not pull away completely, her fingers still resting lightly against his, a quiet reassurance that she is still there. You do not have to figure everything out right now, she murmurs, her voice calm, steady, just breathe. That is enough, and the words settle into him, simple but grounding. Something he can hold on to in the unfamiliar stillness of this moment. His eyes remain on her, clearer now, more focused, and though he still says nothing, there is a shift in his expression, something softer, something less guarded, as if the man he used to be is no longer the only version of him that exists, and for the first time, the silence between them is not empty, it is full of possibility. The days that follow do not rush forward the way the world outside does, they unfold slowly, deliberately, like something that finally understands the value of time, and Alexander begins to notice it in the smallest ways first, the way the light changes in the room, the way the city hum feels distant instead of demanding, and most of all, the way Sophie shows up every morning without fail, never louder than necessary, never trying to take control of the moment, just present in a way that feels unfamiliar but steady. At first, he does not speak much, his voice rough when he tries, his thoughts slower than the life he used to live, but he watches, he listens, and that alone feels like something new, something he has not done in years. You are quiet, Sophie says one morning, setting his tea beside him as she always does, her tone light but observant. That is usually where the real thinking happens. And there is no pressure in her words, no expectation for him to respond, only space. Something he has never been given before. He glances at her, really looks this time, not at her role, not at what she does, but at who she is, the calm steadiness in her posture, the way she does not rush even when everything else demands speed, and for a moment, he finds himself searching for something to say that is not calculated, not strategic, just real. You stayed, he says finally, his voice low, almost uncertain, as if the words themselves are unfamiliar, and Sophie pauses for a second, her expression softening just slightly before she shrugs in a simple, almost effortless way. Someone had to, she replies gently, meeting his gaze without hesitation. And the simplicity of her answer lands deeper than anything else he has heard in a long time. Outside, the world he once controlled is already trying to pull him back, messages waiting, decisions stacking up, people expecting the same man to return and take his place again, but something inside him resists, not out of weakness, but out of awareness, because for the first time, he can see the difference between being powerful and being present. The room, once a place of stillness and uncertainty, now feels like a space where something has been rebuilt, not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. Sophie moves around quietly, adjusting small things, maintaining the routine that brought him back, and he watches her with a kind of focus he never gave to anything that did not directly benefit him before. What happens now? He asks after a moment, his voice steadier this time, not demanding, not commanding, just asking, and Sophie glances at him, a faint smile forming as she leans lightly against the edge of the table. Now, she repeats softly, tilting her head slightly as if considering the question from a different angle. Now you decide what matters, and there is no grand explanation, no long speech, just a simple truth placed gently in front of him. He lets the words settle, his gaze drifting briefly toward the window, the skyline still there, still waiting, but no longer holding the same weight it once did, and when he looks back at her, there is something different in his expression, something quieter, something more grounded. I think I already know, he says, his voice calm, steady in a way that does not rely on control, and for a moment, neither of them says anything more, the silence between them no longer empty, no longer uncertain, but full of understanding.